In today's video, we are ranking Rolex watches from the absolute best to absolute worst. Now, this is a video I've been very excited about making, but I know it won't be easy, especially because watches are so subjective and we aren't going to all agree on what we love. So before I order these watches on the tier list here, it's important to tell you how I'm ranking these. I'll be taking into consideration normal things like specs, history and price, but also things like exclusivity, class and coolness. So first up is the day date, an extremely famous, well-known watch. It shows the day and the date, hence the name. So this has always been a much flashier version of a watch from Rolex. It comes in those really nice metal options like gold, platinum and white gold. You have a choice of the fluted or non-fluted bezel, and the President bracelet will always be iconic. It's not quite, up there S tier for me, but it definitely belongs here in the A tier. So next up, again, just as famous and well known probably as the day date, is the Date-Just. This watch comes in more realistic materials for a more agreeable price. The Date-Just, in my opinion, is one of the most classic watches when you think about Rolex, and this model is just so goddamn good looking. The Date-Just 41 with the mint green dial being one of my all-time favourites. This for me is without question an S tier watch, so that's where I'm going to put it. Moving on, we have the Sky Dweller, one of the most beautifully complex complications in a watch for sure. It's a thick watch because of the movement, but I think most people let that go because it's again an iconic Rolex model that's extremely attractive. This is definitely the grail watch for a lot of people. The price admittedly hinders its ability a bit for this tier list, but it definitely belongs here. Okay, next is the Oyster Perpetual. This watch gives me wedding present vibes in a good way. It's classy but not overstated and has a lot of dial options for everyone. And of course, Rolex have recently had some fun with these dials too. This watch for Rolex is much easier to obtain and much more affordable as well, which is always a plus. So for me, I think this watch goes here in the A category. So up next is the 1908. Now, most people weren't expecting this watch when it was released by Rolex. It's funny because so many of Rolex's lineup have that cool factor because they've been around so long and have grown on us over time. The 1908 doesn't have that luxury, but it doesn't really matter. This for me is a really cool watch, and over time I think people will see that. It's got that gorgeous guilloche dial, a new movement that was designed for the release of this watch. And let's not forget, the whole watch is decked in 950 grade platinum. This is a new watch, but it's very cool already, and I think it's only going to grow on us as watch fans. I'm going to put this in the A category. I know a lot of people have love for this next watch, and that is the Rolex Air King. The Air King is considered classic and timeless, though I've never really seen its appeal. It's got features that I love, but overall it's quite bland. It doesn't really sing to me. It's a solid all-rounder for sure, but personally for me that doesn't make it desirable. This may rustle some feathers, but I'm going to have to put this watch here. Okay, next up is the GMT Master 2. This has always been a difficult watch for me to place. This is a very cool watch, don't get me wrong, and the Ever Rose Brown dial version is, I think, perfect in every way. I think maybe it's just a little bit overhyped. I'm not sure why, maybe because now everyone I see that wears one isn't actually into watches that much. And I would always choose other Rolex watches over this one for some reason, so I guess that's a big clue for me. I could already feel this is a bit controversial, so I apologise in advance, but for me, this watch is gonna go here. Okay, moving on, we have the Rolex Sea Dweller. We know this watch is made specifically for diving, and it reaches incredible depths of 4,000 feet. You could say this is like a Submariner on steroids, so it is cool. But for me, this watch is a little bit lost. I'm not sure where it stands in the lineup. I keep having to remind myself that Rolex also have the Deep Sea, which goes to much greater depths, and that was a technological marvel. It was built more for a real purpose, to push the boundaries of how deep a watch can go. The Sea Dweller for me is kind of just in the middle of those two watches, the Submariner and the Deep Sea. So for me, I'm going to put it here. Next up is the Rolex Submariner, one of the most famous watches ever made. Now this watch is obviously highly sought after, although it's not as affordable and easy to obtain anymore, which has made this watch a little bit less cool. Not that I wanted it to be less cool. Being the most popular watch, it begins to pop up everywhere within communities that may not truly appreciate its value. Think celebrities, drug dealers, YouTubers. But let's be honest, this is an iconic dive watch. The dive watch to rule all dive watches. I don't think it can personally be topped in terms of looks and function, although I have to admit the Omega Seamaster does do a good job in coming close. This for me is undoubtedly a god tier watch. This next watch is going to be just as easy to rank as the previous watch, and this is the Daytona, an absolute gem from Rolex. It's good looking, historical, it's very expensive, but actually, I think worth the money. Retail prices, that is. A lot of people think this is the best chronograph watch ever made, and I wouldn't argue with them. It's like the Cindy Crawford of the watch world. Everyone wants it and looks up to it. And what's more, it just keeps getting better and better, and I don't know how Rolex keep doing that. This is a god tier watch, and if you disagree with me, you're going to need a very good reason. Next up is the Yacht-Master. Now this is a very interesting watch for me, and I'll always say to people, if you dislike this watch, then perhaps you haven't seen it in person. I used to not really think much about this watch, and then I had the chance to wear one. I loved it so much I put myself on the waiting list and was lucky enough to get my own eventually. Now there are several options you can go for, but in my opinion the rhodium dial with the platinum bezel is one of the best watches Rolex have ever made. Dare I say it, better than the Submariner. It's probably one of the most underrated watches Rolex make as well, and you just don't see that many around, which is a good thing. It makes this watch feel a bit more special in a sea of GMT Master 2s and Submariners. For me, again, this might be controversial to you guys, but this is a god tier watch and always will be. Another all-in-one watch from Rolex is the Explorer. Some may think it's a little bit boring. Die-hard Rolex fans will always love this watch because it's not showy off. You won't find a, look at me, I've got a Rolex person wearing this. Now, despite all of this, I don't really get on with the looks of this watch. It's just a bit too plain for me. Sorry to any offended, but for me, this watch goes here. Moving on to the Explorer 2, a really fun, interesting watch. I'm not personally a fan of the design. I think it's one of Rolex's more basic models, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that, and if anything, it's a more grounded Rolex, more attractive for the everyday user, which is always a plus. For me, not something I've found myself too drawn to, but I do respect this watch a lot. So I'm going to put this here. So we've talked about the Sea Dweller, and now we've got the Deep Sea. It's a huge, chunky watch with only one purpose really, to go very deep into our oceans. It's a watch with a fascinating purpose, and for me, that's very cool. So I'm going to put this here. Next up, we have the Yacht-Master 2, which was sadly discontinued in 2024. I say sadly, but you know, this wasn't a surprise to many people when it was announced. This watch was actually the only other Rolex chronograph other than the Daytona, but sadly this wasn't enough to keep Rolex interested enough. This watch sits in a weird place for me. I've never been enthusiastic about it, and if I had to choose a watch in their lineup that looked least like a Rolex, it would have been this watch. I personally, like many, won't miss this model, so I'm going to put it here. Next up is another discontinued watch from Rolex. It's the Milgauss. Okay, hear me out. I have always loved this watch. It's always been a little bit different, the black sheep of the family. I love that its original creation was aimed at the scientific community and those who work around magnetic fields. Now, it's said that many scientists at CERN wear this watch, and as a science nerd myself, that's very cool. I think its looks are unique, and that zigzag hand is indeed Marmite. You either love it or hate it. It's definitely not for everyone, but for me, the Milgauss belongs all the way up here. I know, don't shoot me. Okay, last up we have the Cellini. This has always been more of an elegant dress watch. It was made in a variety of styles, but the range was discontinued in 2022, leaving all but one model, the ever-rose Cellini Moonphase. This watch may actually be discontinued now as of 2024, I'm not actually sure, but this is a gorgeous watch which carries a true history for the brand. I'd give one of my limbs to own one of these watches. It's so cool, and for me, I'm going to put it here. So here we are, the final tier list for all Rolex models. Let me know what you think of this list and if you agree or disagree with some of these rankings. Remember, this is my personal list of my favourites, so this list is probably a little bit unconventional for most, but that's the beauty of this hobby. It's all mostly subjective. As always guys, thanks for watching and I'll see you next time.